Here are 5 ideas for what makes a city great for street and urban photography. First, a city has to have inviting squares and public spaces. One of the greatest joys of visiting any city on any continent is people watching. Squares offer the opportunity for people to gather, hang out, sit in cafes, be themselves, do stupid things, and perhaps unknowingly pose for your camera. I'd say that any city that lacks lively public spaces cannot possibly be considered as a great city to photograph. Public squares also have a second important purpose for the photographer. Not only are squares stages for the people on them, but also for the buildings on the streets that surround them. One of my favorite things about traveling and photography is walking into a city's main square for the first time and just soaking it all in, especially that statue at the center. Usually it's some big dude with a walrus mustache on a horse, but not always. Anyway, the concentration of important buildings, open spaces, and people usually mean public squares offer you, the photographer, a great city stage where you can linger, maybe even blend in, and snap away. The second ingredient are pedestrian streets and markets. The advantages to these are similar to those of public squares, but not quite identical. Public squares allow you to see people at leisure, taking a break or connecting with their friends. Whereas on the other hand, shopping streets allow you to immerse yourself in the hustle and bustle of daily life as people just go about their business. Cities are all about commerce, so, with the exception of a few places, a good city center will have at least one bustling shopping street and public market hall. Some cities can offer great variety in the experiences you can photograph too. Milan, Italy, for example, has one of the most elegant, beautiful shopping arcades in the world. But just a few blocks away is a crowded middle-class shopping street chock full of younger people, teens on the make, members of different immigrant communities, posers, and people who I don't necessarily want to catch me photographing them. So with these first two categories, public squares and shopping streets, I would say North American cities generally are at a disadvantage compared to European cities. Unfortunately, the North American cities have an emphasis on car culture at the expense of pedestrian friendliness. However, there are many exceptions like New York, Chicago, Boston, and Montreal, to name just some. What matters is that cities embrace bold experimental design at any point in their histories, not necessarily even in the current day. Cities like these tend to be more open to new ideas and experimentation. To me as a photographer, these places are more interesting to photograph than cities that tend to be static or homogeneous in their buildings. Often, cities will have building codes in their centers that discourage or restrict bold architecture. On recent travels to Milan, Italy, and Valencia, Spain, I was pretty much blown away by some of the cutting-edge structures that have gone up. Putting up such structures takes money and vision, and a population willing, at least to some degree, to be on board. For me, such projects are what make cities dynamic and exciting, and, for the photographer, way more interesting and fun to document. So I'm going to offer 2 more ideas as to what makes a city great to photograph. But first, I'd like to invite you to like this video if you're enjoying it and consider subscribing to this channel. I'd also greatly welcome your thoughts in the comments below. The fourth necessary ingredient is natural beauty. Some cities have it and some not so much. For ages, photographers have embraced the theme of contrasting the natural world with that of the built world, and I think this theme is still very relevant in photography today. I'm not saying that cities in ugly flat settings are not worth photographing, but I am saying that cities with a unique or striking natural setting offer you, the photographer, more variety. Examples here might be Rio de Janeiro, Istanbul, or San Francisco, but also to some extent Chicago, Miami, and Barcelona. The challenge for the photographer is to avoid the usual postcard cliches that you see everywhere, and rather to try and photograph these cities in a different way, to show them in a different lighting, convey a mood, show an odd juxtaposition, or something else new and fresh. Before I offer my 5th and final idea, here are some factors that don't matter so much. First, and I know this might sound controversial, is light. Light does not make a city great for photography. The reason is that you, as the photographer, can make interesting photos in almost any lighting condition. London and New York City, for example, don't have what I would consider great light for most of the year. Many washed out cloudy days. But the street photography that comes out of these two cities is probably among the best in the world. The second ingredient that doesn't matter so much is climate, and much for the same reason. A creative photographer can excel in any climate. Sure, cold, snowy cities sometimes lack street life. Some of the photographs I've seen of lonely streets during a New York or Chicago winter, especially at night, are some of the most evocative photos I've ever seen. So the final and most important ingredient that makes a city great for photography are the people who live there. Can you photograph them without causing you or them undue stress? I have found that most North American, European, and Asian cities score at about the same level here. Most citizens tolerate photographers, but you have to be mindful when pointing a lens at someone. Some cities might score higher. I used to live in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and during my time there, Brazilians were absolutely, totally friendly toward photographers. It was an early land of selfies, and of course you can take my picture. No money expected. But let me tell you, today I live in a West African city, Dakar, Senegal, that is completely different. Taking street pictures here is definitely frowned upon, and not just with a large camera, but also with an iPhone. And not just of people, but of buildings too. This is for a complex set of reasons which I'll explain in a later video, but it's mostly cultural. It's forced me to become an almost underground photographer because I think this city and the people who live here are worth documenting. Well, that's about all I have, and I hope you enjoyed the video. In future videos, I'll focus on some of the best and most difficult cities for street photography. So, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.